Talking with a neighbor to a man by the name of Dave Nichols. It is his farmhouse that federal authorities now have surrounded. They have gone through some outbuilding. We're told his name is James Nichols, not David Nichols, James Nichols. And we don't know whether he's a member of the so-called Michigan militia. That's an anti-federal government right-wing extremist group. It has gone on maneuvers in the Michigan woods in the far north. They are opposed to most matters that have to do with the government that infringe on what they believe are their personal rights. But you heard his neighbor say that he did not know, and in fact did not believe that Mr. Nichols was a member of the Michigan militia. He did go to meetings of something called For the People, in which there was a discussion of the bills moving through the state legislature and the Congress that may interest them and, is by his own description, arouse them in some instances. NBC's Pete Williams covers the Justice Department for us. He's been on top of this investigation all day long. He's now in Washington. Pete, let's go back to Oklahoma and Perry. The Highway Patrol picked up a man for speeding, thought that he fit the description of the suspect with the crew cut, and called in the federal authorities. Where do we stand on that now?
He is now being interviewed by federal officials, Tom. They were called in after the local authorities thought he met the description of one of the two John Does, one of the two men for whom arrest warrants were issued yesterday. They feel fairly confident that he may indeed be the John Doe with the crew cut, the short-haired man who rented the Ryder truck and used an alias, we're told, of Robert Kling, a name that doesn't mean anything because it was an alias, turned out to be the name of no one that connected up to anything. But for some reason that we don't yet know, the federal authorities were called in and have a fair degree of confidence he is in fact their man, and there may be an announcement on that later this afternoon. What we've just been watching from Michigan is, of course, the most tense time in any kind of law enforcement action when federal agents arrive armed on the scene. They don't know what to expect. They want to be careful that they don't endanger themselves or anybody around or anyone inside. But what we were told here by officials in the government in Washington, in several departments of government, is that the people there are not the suspects, as it were. In other words, what they're interested in is some physical evidence that they were told might be in this location. So we should be very careful to say that as far as we know, federal authorities don't think that there is a key suspect tied to their investigation at this location. They want to look for evidence, and whether that has been found, we don't know yet. And indeed, what exactly they're looking for, we don't know yet. All we know is that it somehow ties back to the rental on Monday in Junction City, Kansas, of that 24-foot-long Ryder truck that was ultimately parked in front of the federal building and exploded to such devastating results, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, Pete Williams. That's a complete update on where we stand in the investigation itself. These anti-government militia groups, pro-gun groups, are springing up across the American West. They're in Michigan. They are in parts of Utah. We're going to go back now to Detroit, to our affiliate there, WDIV. They have some additional information on the raid on that farmhouse. Now let's listen to Mort Krim, the anchor at WDIV.
Pointed to this man as very possibly being a suspect in the case. And as you pointed out, Mike, it's unlikely that the head of the FBI would have gone to check personally on this, would have put the prestige of the agency behind it if they didn't have more to go on than simply that here's a speeding motorist who looks like a composite sketch.
Well, judging by the size of the police officers, the heavy armor that they're bearing, and the fact that they are taking their time in entering, indicates that they have yet to do what they raided that place for, and that is namely to obtain some evidence. Particularly interested in to the right of this building, a large barn. One of the things, of course, they would be looking for in any raid connected with this would be large quantities of fertilizer, large quantities of fuel oil. Now, I found it very interesting to hear that the man that Kevin Dietz talked to indicated that this was an organic farmer. That this man, which is also another part of many of these paramilitary groups, is that they're very much into the environment, into organic gardening, believing that the government is behind it.
We're back here in Oklahoma City now. We are doing joint coverage not only with our affiliate here in Oklahoma City, KFOR, but the NBC affiliate in Detroit, WDIV. You've been listening to the people in the studio there, and also Kevin Dietz at the scene of that raid on a farmhouse. As Pete Williams informed you, that was a raid primarily for evidentiary purposes. They're looking for material that may be connected in some fashion. How, we cannot say. The bombing here at the federal building in downtown Oklahoma City, they are continuing to go through that building. We have been saying all afternoon that they do expect at some point today to get into the area. where the child care center was located, and the prospects there are very grim indeed. We think that there probably are at least 20 children still trapped in there, and the chances that any of them survive, highly unlikely indeed. What's coming up here in the next 2 days is that on Sunday there will be a statewide prayer service led by Billy Graham at the state fairgrounds in Oklahoma City. That was announced today by Governor Frank Keating, and President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton will be coming to that. But before we get to Sunday, of course, we still have to have the official announcement of this arrest in Perry, Oklahoma, and we hope to have some additional details on that as well. Probably Attorney General Janet Reno or Judge Louis Freeh, who is the director of the FBI. It may even go higher than that, all the way to the White House. That's the situation in Washington. There is that continuing drama that is being played out in Michigan and in Perry at the moment, Perry, Oklahoma, in the heart of oil field country right now. Federal authorities are talking with the suspect who was arrested in this case. He did have a crew cut. Dr. Neil Livingston, you were just in Oklahoma recently. You are an expert on terrorism. When you were here, was there any talk at all about the Michigan militia or any connections between the Southwest and what has been going on in the North Woods of Michigan?
None whatsoever, Tom. I've been out there several times in the last 2 years, and each time the local law enforcement authorities, like police departments everywhere, were primarily concerned with drugs and gangs. And when you ask them about things like terrorist groups and so on, they pointed out that they had various groups that they were concerned about. One of those groups, however, were people that were energized over the Waco and incident and the Randall Weaver incident in Idaho. In other words, these kinds of very right-wing gun advocates that have been very, very upset at the government over the last couple of years. And those are the kinds of people that get into militias. In the state of Montana, for example, there are supposedly 16 different counties that have militias. This movement's growing very fast.
Dr. Livingston, in Montana, they have taken to not using driver's licenses or even license plates on their cars, and local officials are, in fact, intimidated by them and have some hesitation about stopping them.
That's true, and there have been reports, although I have not been able to confirm them, that even some law enforcement people may be involved with this movement in some rural counties in Montana. But the fact is that, yes, they do intimidate law enforcement officials because they're known to be heavily armed. They have a chip or a paranoia. In other words, if they're pulled over and stopped, there is concern that they might immediately open fire on someone. So it's a serious situation, and one that has not gotten as much attention as it should have from perhaps national media and law enforcement over the past couple of years.
All right. Dr. Livingston, I'm joined here by one of the real heroes of the rescue operation that has been going on. This is Captain Brad Everett. You've just come off duty.
Well, we're not actually off duty. We're still working right now, but we were able to join you for a little bit.
Well, we're live on television right now, Doctor. We had Dr. Livingston on the air. You're Captain Everett. Can you tell us what's going on in that building at the moment?
Well, obviously there's an awful lot of debris and rubble in there that has to be removed in order to get to the bodies or possibly, hopefully might find some more live victims that might be trapped. Of course, that's obviously the first concern. And then naturally after that comes body removal and making sure that the structure's as safe as possible as we carry on our operations.
We were told earlier today by the Assistant Fire Chief that you had not yet been able to get into that area where the daycare center was located. Is that the situation?
To my knowledge, that's still true.
You work in 2-hour shifts?
Yes, they try and take us in for 2 hours and bring us out for a little bit of rehab and then take us back in.
What's the most difficult part?
Well, obviously, somewhat physically involved with some of it, and obviously, too, the traumatic injuries that are involved with this type of a scene.
And have people been holding up all right on the rescue team?
I think they've all been doing excellent.
Is there any hope at all now that you'll continue to find any survivors? We've not had one in, what, more than 30 hours?
I've got some hope. Of course, everybody wants to hope they'll find some more, but just from other scenes throughout the world, and be it earthquakes or building collapse or whatever, there's been plenty of times when people have been found later on. And, you like to hang on to that hope.
All right. Captain Everett, we thank you very much for stopping by.
Thank you.
We know that you need your break when you can get them.
All right.
Thank you very much. We're not going to let you go too far because we have one of our microphones on you. This is Making Up Television on the Fly here as we continue to cover this very fast-breaking story. We're going to go back now to WDIV in Detroit, where they are interviewing one of the friends of James Nichols, the man who owns the farmhouse, where that federal raid now is underway, seeking evidence.
You're going to call the cops, report me for robbery. If I come to your back door as a beggar and take it piece by piece, oh, well, where'd it go, you know?
Sir, these federal agents feel that Mr. Nichols may have something to do with this situation in Oklahoma City.
That's what I have to say to that.
Relatives?
No. The man's from Lapeer area originally. He comes up, he farms 800 acres here organically. All the man's trying to do is make a living, you know, and grow a crop which is in demand. Organic crops are in high demand right now. You get high dollar, and you got to do that with special, you know, with special. I won't say so much as fertilizer as.
So why do you think they're here?
He has made himself known in Sanilac County.
This is a neighbor of James Nichols, who owns the farmhouse, and as you heard him describing the 800-acre organic farm that he has been working, he's also, however, been an interested participant, if not a member, of some of the more extreme groups that have been meeting in that area. It's also worth pointing out, of course, that federal authorities now believe that what happened here is that a very large bomb was constructed from ammonium nitrate, effectively fertilizer, and some kind of diesel fuel. That can be a very effective bomb. They think that it developed a force equivalent to 4,000 pounds of dynamite, and that may be one of the reasons that they are at that farm location. We heard Kevin Dietz a short while ago, the reporter on the scene, say that they did go through some of the farm outbuildings, including the silos in the back, but a neighbor did say about Mr. Nichols that he did not think that he was a member of the militia. However, he had appeared at several of the meetings of more conservative groups in that area. Ray Kelly is the former New York City police commissioner. He was the man in charge at the time of the World Trade Center bombing. You have seen him recently in the news because he's just returned from Haiti, where he has restored law and order and a police force to that tiny community. He's been with us for the past several days watching all of this now. Mr. Kelly, a lot of people in this country think that big cities, especially New York, are the most dangerous places to be. But this is evidence, I guess, that random violence of a magnitude that we could not have imagined before can occur almost anywhere in America.
Yes, it looks that way, Tom. These militia groups are really a Midwestern phenomena. We do have some in New York State, but not nearly to the extent that they are in the middle of America. And this is certainly quite a twist in the investigative focus.
Ray, we're told now that they are awaiting a search warrant before they go into that farmhouse in Decker, Michigan, which is north of Detroit. But I would guess as well that after the Waco incident, that all the federal agencies now have changed their tactics and reviewed them with great care, haven't they?
Oh, I think so. I think caution is the watchword. I think a lot of lessons were learned from Waco, and I think it's better to wait in any of these warrant situations. The mindset now is that you can't go wrong by waiting.
Ray, you're a former New York City police commissioner. You've been active in law enforcement all of your life. You were a Marine before that. You were in one of the great killing grounds in this part of the world in Haiti recently. Why do you think that so many people in this country are so aroused by the ban on assault weapons?
It's very hard to fathom it. To me, it defies logic. You don't need a weapon of war to protect yourself. You don't need it to hunt animals. I personally cannot understand it, but you're right. It is an emotional rallying point. The ban on assault weapons now being looked to be overturned in Congress. It's a very strong movement in that area. To me, just defies logic.
Ray Kelly, we'll ask you to stand by there. We're going to be talking now with NBC chief legal correspondent. That's Jack Ford. Jack, it's a little surprising to me that federal agents, state and local agents would arrive at that farmhouse without a search warrant in hand. It's not so hard to get one under these circumstances.
Well, it isn't, Tom. You can get it somewhat more quickly than most people think. Oftentimes, you will submit an affidavit to a judge or a magistrate, somebody who's empowered to say, all right, there's probable cause here for me to issue this search warrant for you. You can even do it by telephone. You get a judge or a magistrate to put somebody under oath and give them the information. It may be what we're seeing here is essentially they're surrounding this situation here until that warrant warrant is received. What you want to do is have people in place to make sure that there is nothing of any violent nature going on, that evidence might not be destroyed at the time. We're not suggesting that's what's going on here, but generally that's the procedure you'd follow. Essentially encircle everything, protect it all while you're getting the warrant, and then be in a position to walk in or knock the door in if you have to, but that'll be done once you have a warrant in your hand. Looking at what we're seeing now coming out of Michigan, it may well be that that's exactly what's going on there.
Jack, while we have you here, let's do a quick update, if we can, as well, on the O.J. Simpson trial, because it too has reached a crisis stage today.
Absolutely, Tom. We talked before, another bizarre twist in a case that's becoming known for bizarre twists. What happened is earlier today, the jurors essentially staged something of a mini
Washington, NBC's Pete Williams. He has the name of the suspect in Perry, Oklahoma. Pete?
I wish I did, Tom. I don't have the name. I'm working the phones and trying to confirm it. I've heard reports of the name, but I can't confirm it, and I'm reluctant to say anything further. And I'm sorry, I just don't have it.
That's all right. In the best of times, and especially given the nature of this coverage and this kind of an investigation, occasionally we do have cross lines of communication. The federal authorities are still in Perry. Still have him under questioning, so far as we know, Pete?
Yes, so far as we know. It's not clear. You know, we had been told earlier today that they had arrested him for speeding earlier today. I think it's quite accurate to say he was arrested for speeding. What we're hearing now is that it may not have been within the last few hours. It may have been earlier than that, and that we're trying to check as well.
All right. Pete Williams, if you get a name, I know you'll call us first.
Indeed so.
Let's go back to Michigan now to station WDIV. The situation there is that federal authorities have surrounded a farmhouse north of Detroit. It is an organic farm owned by a man by the name of James Nichols. He has been an active listener, we're told, someone who's been interested in right-wing organizations in that area, but his friends and neighbors say that he's had nothing absolutely to do with them. Pete Williams told us that this raid on the farmhouse is an evidentiary raid. They're looking for evidence in the case, possibly for fertilizer, because it was a fertilizer-based bomb here, ammonia nitrate, that caused this great physical damage and struck such a great tragedy in the heart of Oklahoma's capital city.
County today, and they planned this very carefully. They spent about 3 hours in planning sessions today for this.
Mike Lewis, who was in the News 4 helicopter, is now on the ground and may have some additional and later information for us from that farmhouse in Decker. Mike? Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Go. Yes, hello. Okay. Mike, this is Mike Lewis out here now. They have just asked us to pull back our camera shot a little bit so as to not reveal their positions around the farmhouse, which they have surrounded, of course. We have also reported to you that police believe that one of the suspects or both suspects may be former residents of this area up here in Decker, Sanilac County, up in the Thumb Country, and that they still have relatives here. We do not know. Mr. Nichols certainly does not fit the description that the composites that were put out. He is 35 to 40 years old, a full beard. The people we've been talking to around this area say they are not aware of any, they've never seen anybody matching those composites who have been hanging out around this farmhouse. As you were reporting, there has been no movement for the last hour outside of that farmhouse, except a few more cars and what may be some type of van or truck, explosives perhaps as a precaution, pulling up to that scene. But again, the FBI people had put this earlier at an 85 to 90% confidence that their information was good, that there may be a connection between this suspects and this area up here in Decker. The farmhouse, as we've been talking about, is owned by a man named James Nichols. We do not know if anybody has been taken into custody, but apparently the word is that they're just looking for evidence. Now, obviously, that would be evidence linking them to Oklahoma City, to this rental truck, of course, to any of the bomb-making material that were used out in Oklahoma City. That's it from here for right now. I'll toss it back to the studio.
Mike, and we have, thank you, Mike, we have some late information, and this is significant. From Washington, a federal law enforcement source has identified the man who was arrested in Perry, Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma City bombing. The source says the man is Timothy McVeigh, M-C-V-E-I-G-H. Now, there are no other details on him, but the official also says the FBI is seeking a pair of brothers named Jerry Lynn Nichols and James Douglas Nichols. And that James Douglas Nichols very likely is the James Nichols who resides in that farmhouse in Decker.
All right, a major piece of the puzzle there filled with that information. That house is listed as occupied by James and
all right, we are doing joint coverage here with WDIV, our affiliate in Detroit, Michigan, also with station KFOR here in Oklahoma City, as this manhunt spreads out across the country, an intense investigation that involves local, state, and of course federal authorities. And you just heard Mort Krim, the anchor at WDIV, say that the man who has been arrested in Perry, now under questioning by federal authorities there, has been identified as Tim McVeigh. Tim McVeigh is the name that we have. We cannot confirm that. It's important to underline that that has not absolutely been nailed down by reliable sources within the Justice Department. NBC's Pete Williams is continuing to work on that aspect of the story. And James Nichols is the owner of the farmhouse in Michigan that federal authorities and state and local officials also have under surveillance and indeed surrounded at this time. They're now beginning to ask some of the local media there to pull back a distance. Dr. Neil Livingston, who has been working with NBC, is an expert on terrorism. He's with us now in our Washington studios. Dr. Livingston, beyond the issue of guns, what motivates these domestic extremist groups?
Well, there are a lot of different people that are attracted to them for one reason or another. There are tax resistors, in other words, people who don't like paying their taxes, and in some cases refuse to pay their taxes. There are people who believe that the federal government is spying on them, that they're very paranoid, or they want to practice different types of religious beliefs. All of these people have coalesced into these groups, along with skinheads who have a very strong racist and anti-Semitic platform, and remnants of the Aryan Nations movement, which is that group that grew up in prisons made up of white supremacists. So it's a real grab bag of people, but guns are really the uniting factor. It's the fear of the government's going to take their guns away, and that they should have a right to bear any type of arms that they want.
Is this also the price that a society pays for becoming increasingly multicultural? As we become more of a polyglot nation, there are those groups that are simply threatened by the idea of living side by side with other groups?
There's no question about it. Skinheads have been arrested in different parts of the country for attacking foreigners, attacking blacks. Some of these groups, they tend to, their membership tends to come from the lower end of the economic totem pole. These are the people often that feel most threatened by other people coming into the society. A lot of these people don't have a lot of skills, and many of them are probably have agriculturally based trades, if anything at all. So as a consequence, they don't meet a lot of foreigners. They don't meet a lot of blacks. They don't meet a lot of Jews. They fear those people, and they disseminate all sorts of hate literature. And these are the people, by the way, Tom, that buy these manuals and produce these manuals on how to build bombs. Those firms are very close to them.
All right. Dr. Neil Livingston, thanks very much. We'll ask you to stand by. We'll be back throughout the day, throughout the afternoon on this NBC station with continuing coverage of this very fast-breaking story, the arrest of one man, now identified tentatively as Timothy McVeigh, that has not been confirmed, in Perry, Oklahoma, a farmhouse that has been surrounded by state, federal, and local officials in Decker, Michigan, in a search for evidence. And here in Oklahoma City, the search continues for still more bodies. We expect to be back with Attorney General Janet Reno and additional details on all of this in about 30 minutes or so. But for now, I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News, Oklahoma City.
This has been an NBC News special report.
Right now in Decker, Michigan, which is north of Detroit, in the area called the Thumb of Michigan, a farming area where there has been a lot of political activity involving extremist groups. A number of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies are on the scene. They have surrounded a farmhouse. They're waiting for a search warrant, we're told, so that they can investigate the farmhouse that is owned by James Nichols. James Nichols, the agents now, we're told, have been in the farmhouse. They have come out. They did investigate the outbuildings earlier. And, of course, it's worth pointing out, this is an 800-acre farm. It's an organic farm. The bomb here was made up, we're told, of fertilizer, of ammonia nitrate, mixed with diesel oil. That could be a very powerful explosion. In this case, they believe that it amounted to about 4,000 pounds of explosives, and of course it ripped away at the federal building, the A.P. Murrah building here in Oklahoma City. Death toll expected to hit 150. It also struck fear into the heart of this country because the target was the federal system of government. DEA agents, we're told, still are unaccounted for who worked in that building. 6 members of the Secret Service office in that building, 4 of them agents, 2 support personnel, still unaccounted for. The ATF also has an office in that building. All of their people managed to escape death. However, several of them were hurt, but they're recovering nicely, we're told. NBC's Pete Williams, who covers the Justice Department, is in Washington right now. Pete, where do we go next with this investigation?
Well, I think the focus right now, Tom, is on that farm in Michigan that you just talked about. Very eager, the federal officials are very eager to see what their search produces. Just to go back for a moment, Tom, on Timothy McVeigh, who was arrested, we're now told, on the day of the bombing, shortly afterward. He was, to tell you a little more about what we know, he was arrested for speeding. And when he was arrested, as the Attorney General said, he had a firearm, although we're told that that firearm was registered to him. It was legally his, so it's not a firearm charge that he was being held on. It was initially a traffic charge. There may have been a problem with his registration or his license. It may have been out of date. For whatever reason, local authorities held him unaware of who he turned out to be. Then, after the arrest warrant was issued last night, after the description was put out, then local authorities began to put 2 and 2 together, and that is what has led now to the federal custody of Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma. Now, moving to Michigan. Authorities there, as you say, just executed a federal search warrant that agents of the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were waiting for before they entered the property there, before they actually went inside the buildings, looking for some evidence. All right, why there? And the answer, we're told, is that there is something, and I don't know exactly what it is, but something about Timothy McVeigh and the way he filled out the form when he rented the Ryder truck on Monday in Junction City, Kansas, that connected them to 2 brothers, and that in turn led them to this farm. Now, their immediate goal in going there today was to search. Whether or not there will be any arrests of people based on that search is yet to be seen, but I think that's going to take a while because they'll have to produce what they got in their search, and then they'll have to get a warrant for someone's arrest, and that will take a while. So I don't think we're about to see any arrests here imminently, if there are indeed going to be any in Michigan, Tom.
And when do we think that Mr. McVeigh may be brought to Oklahoma City or taken to a federal magistrate somewhere? Conceivably, I suppose he could be taken to Tulsa.
Well, I think what Director Free of the FBI said, that he would be taken before a U.S. magistrate, and he seemed to imply that Oklahoma City was the closest place, although there certainly could be Tulsa, but that's close enough. They might bring him on into Oklahoma City. They're vague about that at this point. But I think the arrest warrant is already there. One of the problems they're going to have is once they go ahead and charge him, that may then require them to unseal that warrant, and maybe they don't want to do that at this point. So that could be part of the timing. However, as many of your experts around here can tell you with better certainty than I, once someone is taken into federal custody, that does start a clock ticking in terms of when certain things has to happen. They have to be charged within such an amount of time. They have to be arraigned and so forth. So that clock has already started.
All right. Pete Williams, stand by there because, of course, in just a few moments we'll be hearing from President Clinton live from the White House press briefing room, his take on all of these developments. We want to go to our legal correspondent now, Jack Ford, who not only covers the Simpson trial, but he was a member of a U.S. Attorney's Office, a federal prosecutor. Can you hold somebody without bail in a case like this, Jack?
Tom, you can, but what has to happen is this, as Pete Williams said, they have to get this Timothy McVeigh, as soon as they've served the warrant on the federal charges on him, before a federal magistrate or a federal judge as soon as possible. It could be as soon as tomorrow. It may well not be until Monday. Once they do, he's arraigned. Now, that's simply a process of a judge saying to him, this is what you've been charged with. Do you understand what the nature of the charges are? Tell him he's entitled to an attorney. If he can't have one, if he can't afford one, the government will provide one warrant for him. The next thing that'll happen will be some type of bail application. Now, the federal criminal system allows a judge to say, I'm not going to release you, regardless of what the charges are, if the government shows that he would be a danger to society if he is released. And at that point in time, a great deal of information, as the director said, would be released.
All right, thank you very much, Jack Ford. In Dallas now is another well-known lawyer. You've been seeing him a good deal recently, commenting on the O.J. Simpson case. But in fact, Jerry Spence of Wyoming was the man who represented Randy Weaver, the man who was holed up in northern Idaho. His wife died in an FBI raid on his cabin. His son died as well, and Jerry Spence reluctantly at first came to the defense of Randy Weaver, and ultimately he was acquitted. Jerry Spence, have you been in touch with other white supremacist groups since then? Have they seen you in some way as someone that they can talk to about their grievances?
Well, I think that there have been indeed contacts made by people who claim to be part of these groups, but and they're all over the country. It's a frightening thing. But there's one thing that I need to say to you, Tom, while I have a chance, and that is that we need to be very careful. Now, this is a very dangerous time in America, because although what we saw was a horrid crime that America retches at, nevertheless, it's a dangerous time for us, because the FBI has huge pressure on it, huge pressure to arrest, and it's possible, and it is always possible under these circumstances, as it was in the Randy Weaver case, that they arrest people who aren't guilty. And so we need to watch for that, and we need to be careful also in circumstances like this, that we don't get frightened and terrorized ourselves and begin to hide, get ourselves placed in cages because one person or two people have done these terrible things, which can control, if we're not careful, 250 million American people. It takes courage to be free, and it's risky business to be free, but no matter what they do to us, Tom Brokaw, we have to remain free. I can't hear Tom. I can't hear Tom.
Okay, we all right now?
Thank you,
We're
Tom.
back on, I think.
Thank you.
We had a temporary difficulty with the audio.